Police dog stops at a bloody backpack. What he found changed everything. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that soaks into your bones and makes every shadow feel alive. Officer Ethan Cole was used to long patrols, but this night was different. Beside him walked Shadow, his loyal German shepherd, a dog whose instincts often cut sharper than human reason. Halfway down a deserted street, Shadow froze. His ears twitched, his body stiffened, and his gaze locked onto a dark alley. Ethan followed the dog's lead, always had, always would. The beam of his flashlight sliced through the rain, landing on something crumpled near the trash. A backpack. Not just any backpack, but one stained dark with blood. And tucked inside, a small plastic toy. A child's toy. Ethan's heart sank. He knew in that moment, this wasn't going to be another quiet night. This was the beginning of something much darker. Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent, pulling him deeper into the unknown. The rain had been falling since dusk, steady and unrelenting, draping the streets of Grey Ridge in a curtain of silver threads. Water pooled in shallow gutters, gathering the glow of street lamps into wavering halos, then spilling onto the slick pavement in rippling streams. Tires hissed on the main road, but here, in the narrow veins of the old district, silence pressed close, broken only by the rain and the faint hum of a patrol cruiser. Inside that cruiser sat Officer Ethan Cole, his frame stiff against the driver's seat. He was 40, though in the dim glow of the dashboard, the lines etched into his face made him look older. Military service had marked him first, Afghanistan a decade back. Then the years in Grey Ridge PD had carved the rest. His eyes, grey as the sky above, carried the look of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. Yet tonight, as on every night, there was one presence beside him that cut through the weight of silence, Shadow. The German shepherd sat poised in the passenger seat, his body taut despite the steady rhythm of the rain against the windshield. His ears flicked at every distant sound, the echo of a trash can lid in the wind, the muffled clang of pipes beneath the street. His breath misted against the window as his nose twitched, testing the damp air as if it carried whispers meant for him alone. Shadow wasn't restless by nature. He was controlled, disciplined. But even Ethan could sense something electric in the dog's stillness tonight, like a bowstring drawn tight. Ethan slowed the cruiser at a stoplight, the red glow bleeding across the wet pavement. He glanced at his partner and felt the familiar tug in his chest. In the silence of the patrol, he often caught himself thinking how strange it was that after everything he had lost faith in, after all the years of service that left him jaded, it was a dog who had pulled him back into believing again. Shadow had been assigned to him 18 months ago. At first, Ethan saw him as another responsibility, another soldier in the endless fight against a city rotting from within. But the bond had come swiftly, stealthily, like roots spreading beneath soil. Nights of chasing suspects through alleys, mornings of quiet drives back to the precinct, moments when Shadow's instincts had cut through Ethan's doubt. Together, they had bled into something more than handler and canine. They were survival tethered by trust. The light turned green. Ethan pressed forward, his wipers beating a slow rhythm. He let the memories slip, though one lingered like an ember. A patrol 6 months earlier, when Shadow had barked once, just once, outside a boarded-up laundromat. Against Ethan's better judgment, he had checked. Inside, they'd found a runaway girl, half-starved, curled up behind rusted dryers. Shadow had pressed his nose to her hand, tail swishing gently, as if assuring her that the world still held mercy. Ethan never forgot the look in that girl's eyes when she clung to the dog's neck. It was moments like that which reminded him why he stayed, why he trusted Shadow more than his own instincts. The dog seemed to carry some compass deeper than reason, pointing not north or south, but toward human need, toward the places where hope had gone missing. The radio crackled, static slicing through the quiet. Dispatch murmured about a disturbance near the docks, nothing urgent, already covered by another unit. Ethan leaned back, his shoulders tight. Nights like this, the heavy kind, when the rain made the city smell of iron and smoke, always brought a gnawing unease. He glanced again at Shadow, whose amber eyes reflected the blurred streetlights. The dog wasn't pacing, wasn't whining, but there was something in his stillness that felt louder than sound. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ethan murmured, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of rain. Shadow's ears twitched. He didn't turn, didn't shift. But Ethan could have sworn the dog's gaze sharpened on the empty road ahead. He drove on. Past shuttered storefronts and dripping fire escapes. Past neon signs that flickered and buzzed against the storm. The city felt suspended, as if holding its breath. And Ethan, for all his training and years, felt like a passenger to whatever Shadow was sensing. He had long ago learned not to dismiss it. The dog's unease wasn't random. It never was. They slowed near a row of brick buildings, their windows dark, graffiti smeared across old walls. Shadow's head lifted, nostrils flaring. A low rumble escaped his chest. A sound Ethan had come to know well. Not anger, not fear. A warning. Ethan eased the cruiser to the curb and killed the engine. For a moment, the storm seemed louder, pressing in against the stillness inside the car. He reached for the flashlight on the console, his hand brushing the holster at his hip. Old instincts stirred, the soldier in him, not the cop. He drew in a breath, steadying himself. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though his own pulse betrayed him. Shadow didn't move, his body rigid, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the curtain of rain outside. Ethan followed the line of that gaze, but saw only darkness and wet pavement. Still, he knew better than to argue. Shadow had never once been wrong when it mattered. Outside, the rain slicked his uniform instantly. Drops hammered the brim of his cap, rolled down his collar. The beam of his flashlight cut a pale swath through the night, glinting off puddles like shards of broken glass. The city smelled of oil and damp brick. But beneath it all, Ethan caught something metallic, sharp, wrong. Shadow padded at his side, close enough that Ethan felt the brush of fur against his leg. The shepherd's body was tense, muscles coiled, his breath steady but deliberate. Ethan had seen soldiers like that once, men walking into ambushes they couldn't see but somehow sensed. He swallowed, pushing down the unease clawing at his gut. They reached the mouth of an alley, narrow and shadowed, lined with discarded boxes that sagged under the rain. Ethan swept his light across the ground. Nothing moved, just slick concrete and piles of trash. Yet Shadow froze. His tail stiffened, ears forward, body angled toward the dark throat of the passage. A growl vibrated in his chest, low and unyielding. Ethan's heart thudded once, hard. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, his other hand resting on the cold steel at his side. For years, instinct had been his compass. But tonight, it wasn't instinct that led him. It was the dog beside him, standing silent in the storm. Ethan exhaled, barely audible over the rain. "All right, boy," he whispered, his voice carrying both resignation and trust. "Lead the way." Shadow's growl sharpened into stillness. His entire frame locked, ears pitched forward, nose twitching as though the rain itself had carried a secret only he could hear. Ethan stopped beside him, the weight of silence pressing harder than the downpour. He had worked with enough dogs to know the difference between curiosity and alarm. This wasn't curiosity. This was the moment before lightning struck. "Shadow." Ethan's voice came low, careful, like words might shatter the fragile thread of instinct guiding them. The German shepherd didn't move. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, the leash jerking hard enough to pull Ethan a half-step off balance. The dog's paws slapped against the waterlogged pavement, carrying him straight toward the narrow alley between two derelict buildings. Ethan swore under his breath, his free hand flying to his holster as he followed. His boots splashed through puddles, water seeping cold into his socks. The alley yawned before them, a gash of shadow cutting through the wet brick walls. The storm muffled sound, but something about the passage, too dark, too still, tightened Ethan's throat. His flashlight clicked on with a sharp snap. A beam of pale light knifed forward, slicing through sheets of rain and spilling across heaps of sodden cardboard. The boxes sagged, bleeding ink from long-faded brand names. A rusted bicycle frame leaned against a dumpster, its wheels long stripped away. But none of that explained Shadow's urgency. The shepherd strained against the leash, head low, body coiled. His nose skimmed the ground, then jerked up toward a mound of trash near the alley's end. Ethan slowed, his pulse climbing, gun heavy at his side. He had learned long ago to respect silence in places like this. Silence was never empty. It was hiding something. They crept deeper. Rain drummed against tin gutters above, spilling in uneven rivulets that hissed as they struck the ground. Ethan swept his light across graffiti-smeared walls, layers of curses and names, each half-eaten by time. A rat darted across the beam, its slick body vanishing into shadow. But Shadow ignored it. His focus remained locked on that mound of cardboard. Then Ethan saw it. At first it looked like nothing more than another heap of refuse, but the beam lingered, cutting across fabric instead of paper. A faded backpack, half buried beneath collapsed boxes, the zipper torn, straps frayed from long use. Rain had soaked through the cloth, darkening it, but darker still was the smear across its surface, red, dried at the edges, fresh at the center. Blood. Ethan's chest tightened, his breath stalling. The flashlight shook slightly in his hand as he crouched. The rain was louder now, hammering against his cap, sliding cold down his neck. His other hand hovered above his holster, the soldier in him whispering about traps, about how death sometimes dressed itself in the most ordinary disguises. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though Shadow needed no calming. The shepherd had gone utterly still, amber eyes locked on the pack as though it were alive. Ethan pulled back a flap of cardboard, the wet paper dissolving beneath his fingers. The beam caught on something protruding from the half-open zipper, a flash of plastic. He swallowed hard and tugged the bag free, its weight heavier than expected. The zipper resisted at first, swollen from rain, but gave way with a slow rasp. Inside lay a child's toy, bright once, dulled now by grime and blood. A small plastic car, the kind you'd find clenched in the hand of a boy too young to know the world's cruelty. The wheels were snapped off, edges sharp with cracks. It rested against a smear of red staining the fabric within. Ethan's heart plummeted. He had seen death, carried its smell on his clothes for weeks at a time. But something about the innocence of the toy, so out of place, so fragile, cut deeper than any battlefield memory. His mind stuttered, flashing images he didn't want. A child crying out, a small hand reaching into the dark, ripped away before anyone could answer. He forced a slow breath, steadying himself. This was no accident. This was evidence. A breadcrumb left in the rain, leading somewhere far worse. Shadow shifted beside him, letting out a single bark, sharp, urgent, the sound echoing against the brick like a command. Ethan looked up, the beam of his light trembling as it swept deeper into the alley. Nothing stirred, but he trusted that bark. It meant the trail wasn't finished. He clipped the backpack closed and set it gently back on the ground, as though any rougher motion might dishonor the small story it carried. His hand went for his radio, voice low but measured. Dispatch, Unit 12. Possible child involvement. Found evidence. Requesting. Static swallowed the rest. Ethan tapped the side. Tried again. More static. Rain had been wrecking signals all night, and Grey Ridge's comm system was as tired as the city itself. He cursed under his breath, glancing at Shadow. The dog's ears were forward, his body tense as a drawn wire. "Looks like it's just us," Ethan whispered. He rose to his feet, flashlight sweeping once more across the soaked alley. Every shadow seemed deeper now, every drip of water heavier. He felt the old military awareness creeping in, when the air itself seemed charged, warning you of what eyes couldn't see. Shadow gave another bark, shorter this time, and lunged toward the far end of the alley. The leash strained in Ethan's grip, pulling him forward with a force he couldn't ignore. Ethan's throat tightened. The backpack, the blood, the toy. They weren't the end of the story. They were the beginning. "All right, boy," he murmured, rain sliding cold down his jaw. His voice carried the weight of both trust and dread. "Lead the way." Ethan's thumb pressed the radio again, the plastic casing slick beneath his glove. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Urgent. Possible child victim. Evidence recovered. Request immediate backup on—" The words disintegrated into static. A low hiss filled the channel, broken by jagged cracks of interference. Ethan adjusted the dial, lifted the receiver higher, and tried again. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Nothing, just the storm. Rain clattered against the rooftops above, pouring down in streams that battered his shoulders and soaked the collar of his uniform. The city's weak radio grid had always been unreliable, but tonight it felt like more than bad weather. It felt like being cut off, stranded in the dark with nothing but instinct to guide him. Ethan lowered the radio slowly, his jaw tight. He didn't like this. Every training drilled into him screamed procedure, report, secure the scene, wait for backup. But the silence, buzzing in his ear, told him there would be no procedure tonight. Only him. Only Shadow. He looked down at the shepherd. Shadow stood rigid, tail stiff, nose lifted toward the mouth of the alley. His ears twitched, catching something Ethan couldn't hear. The dog's breath steamed in the damp air, short and deliberate, like every muscle was bracing for movement. "You're sure, aren't you?" Ethan whispered. His own voice sounded small, nearly drowned by the storm. Shadow's response was immediate. A sharp bark tore through the rain, echoing off wet brick like a gunshot. The sound jolted Ethan, shattering the fragile stillness. Then the dog lunged forward, the leash jerking hard in Ethan's grip, pulling him toward the alley's far end. "Damn it, Shadow! Hold up!" Ethan muttered, stumbling a half step before tightening his grip. But there was no mistaking the urgency. This wasn't the bark of curiosity or false alarm. This was the voice Shadow only used when lives were hanging in the balance. Ethan cast one last glance at the backpack lying in the water, its faded straps soaking up the rain. The broken toy car still glinted faintly under the beam of his flashlight, its cracks filled with grime. The image burned into him, innocence shattered, left behind like discarded trash. Whoever carried that pack hadn't gone far. Whoever had bled on it might still be breathing. His stomach clenched. He couldn't wait. He shoved the radio back onto his belt, resigning himself to silence. Procedure could go to hell. There was a child out there, maybe more, and his only lead was the dog tugging at the leash with raw urgency. Shadow barked again, lower this time, his chest rumbling like thunder. He strained forward, paws splashing through puddles, as if the trail were carved into the rain itself. Ethan followed, flashlight beam bouncing across slick pavement. The storm swallowed the city's hum, leaving only the pounding of his boots and the dog's relentless drive. They emerged from the alley into a side street nearly abandoned. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting pale light through the torrent. The shadows between buildings seemed to move with the rain, twisting and curling like they had secrets of their own. Ethan slowed, chest tight, scanning every corner. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though the words were more for himself than for Shadow. But the shepherd didn't ease. His body lowered into a stalking posture, nose pressed close to the ground, then snapping up sharply toward the east. Another bark, short, urgent. Then he pulled Ethan toward the darker stretch of road that cut between old warehouses. Ethan's pulse hammered. The rain tasted metallic on his lips. He gripped his sidearm tighter, the weight of it grounding him. His mind split into two voices. The cop, reminding him of protocol and safety, and the soldier, whispering about momentum, about never losing the trail once you've got it. He glanced down. Shadow's eyes gleamed amber in the lamplight, unwavering, certain. That was enough. "All right, boy," Ethan whispered, his voice steadying with resolve as he let the leash loosen in his grip. "Lead the way." The shepherd bolted forward, water spraying beneath his paws. Ethan followed, his heart sinking deeper into the storm. Whatever lay ahead, the night had already chosen for them. The storm had softened, but the rain still fell in a thin veil, steady enough to blur the outlines of the street. Water ran in rivulets down the gutter, carrying with it the city's grit and oil. Ethan's flashlight beam sliced through the haze, jittering slightly as his boots struck the slick pavement. Shadow was out front, leash taut, body low and deliberate. His nose hovered above the ground, weaving in short, sharp arcs. Every so often, he would stop, paw at a glisten on the concrete, then push forward again. That was when Ethan saw it, a faint smear of red dissolving in the rain, stretched thin as though dragged across the ground. Blood. The sight made his chest tighten. It was fading fast, washed thin by the storm, but there was no mistaking it. Drops and streaks scattered across the slick alley floor, trailing out toward the open street. Each mark felt like a ticking clock, telling Ethan that the victim had been here, that they had left only moments ago, and that every second he hesitated pushed them further from being found alive. He kept moving, but his mind churned. Was he too late already? The thought dug at him like a splinter. He'd seen enough cases end with nothing but cold bodies and colder reports, parents who never stopped waiting by their doors. He clenched his jaw, forcing the memory away. His sister's face, younger than the victims he often found, disappearing one summer afternoon without a trace. He had been 15. He had carried the weight ever since. Tonight, he told himself, would not end like that. Shadow's determination was unyielding. The dog's paws splashed lightly, head jerking with each breath as he locked onto the trail. His tail was stiff, ears pitched forward. He pulled harder with each step, dragging Ethan deeper away from the safety of lit streets and into the outskirts where the city thinned into forgotten space. The buildings grew older, their windows broken, walls scarred with graffiti. Rust streaked down corrugated siding, and rain drummed on sheet metal roofs. The blood trail, faint but still there, cut toward this industrial wasteland. Ethan's light caught another drop, then another, smeared against the curb, as though from a hand that had scraped along in desperation. His stomach twisted. Whoever had left this behind wasn't just lost. They were being dragged. The silence out here was heavier, broken only by the storm and the ragged sound of Ethan's breathing. His boots sank into mud as the pavement gave way to gravel, weeds clawing through the cracks. The smell changed too, less of the city's oil and exhaust, more of rust and mildew, the stench of places abandoned and left to rot. Shadow barked once, sharp and clipped, then surged ahead. Ethan followed, his grip tightening on the flashlight and the leash. Every muscle in his body was tense, every nerve alive with the sense that they were close to something, close to an answer, or close to danger. He paused at the edge of a chain-link fence, peering into the dark beyond. The beam of light picked up the faint shine of more red on the gravel inside. A handprint this time, smeared low as though a child had reached out blindly. Ethan's throat constricted. He pressed his hand against the fence, cold and slick beneath his palm. "God," he muttered under his breath. The rain swallowed the sound. Shadow pressed against the fence, teeth working at the gap where the metal curled loose from the post. He barked again, urgent, then looked back at Ethan with sharp, expectant eyes. All right, Ethan whispered. He unclipped the leash, heart hammering as Shadow darted through the opening. Ethan followed, ducking beneath the bent metal. His uniform snagged briefly, then tore free with a harsh rip that echoed louder than it should have. Inside, the ground sloped down toward the edge of the woods that bordered the city. Old warehouses sat like silent sentinels, their windows black and empty. The trail cut past them, away from light, away from safety. Ethan's flashlight found more stains now, fresher, brighter, still glistening despite the storm. The victim was alive when they passed through here, maybe minutes ago. Shadow stopped abruptly, nose pressed against the ground. His tail lashed once, then he surged forward, growling low. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun at his hip, nerves sparking with adrenaline. The forest loomed ahead, thick with pine and oak, branches swaying in the storm like hands warding him off. He hesitated at the tree line. Every instinct told him this was the kind of place where people disappeared, the kind of place where even the rain might not wash away what happened. But Shadow didn't hesitate. He pressed into the woods, paws quick and certain, his bark ricocheting between the trunks like a beacon. Ethan took one last look at the faint blood on the gravel, the broken line of hope slipping into darkness. His chest tightened, dread gnawing at him, but something else flickered beneath it, a stubborn ember, Shadow's certainty. The dog's body language screamed it, "We're close." Ethan drew a deep breath, steadying the tremor in his hand. He stepped into the woods after Shadow, whispering into the storm, as much to himself as to the partner leading him forward. "Don't let me be too late." The trail bled into the woods, each faint smear of red tugging Ethan deeper beneath the canopy. The storm dulled overhead, rain filtered through the trees in steady drips, The forest floor a patchwork of mud and pine needles. Shadow moved like a shadow indeed, silent, sure, ears pricked forward, nose to the damp earth. Ethan's flashlight carved narrow tunnels of light through the darkness. Every tree seemed to lean closer. Every creak of the wind carried weight. His boots sank with each step, the mud clutching at his soles, pulling him down as though the forest itself wanted to slow him. Then, Shadow froze. His ears twitched, his head cocked toward the left. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Ethan followed his gaze. Through the dripping branches, barely visible, squatted a shack. It leaned as though exhausted, its roof sagging beneath moss and rot. One shutter hung crooked from a rusted hinge, creaking in the wind like a tired sigh. Rain streaked down the warped planks of wood, darkening them to nearly black. Ethan's breath caught. His instincts told him the truth before he even moved closer. This place reeked of secrets. Shadow padded forward, muscles taut, pausing at the edge of the clearing. Ethan raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the shack. No signs of life. No flicker of light through the broken slats. No sound save the rain. Yet Shadow's growl deepened. He had found something. Ethan approached slowly, gun drawn, every nerve lit like a live wire. The closer he came, the stronger the smell. Mold, damp wood, and something sharper beneath it. Something coppery. His stomach clenched. At the door, swollen with moisture, Ethan pressed his shoulder against the frame. The wood groaned, protesting. Finally it gave way with a reluctant crack, swinging inward into pitch darkness. The beam of his flashlight swept across the interior, and his chest tightened like a vice. 3 children. They were tied to chairs in the center of the room, their wrists bound with rough rope, faces pale and streaked with tears. The oldest, a girl maybe 10, sat rigid with fear, her lips split, her eyes wide and glassy. Beside her, a boy of about 8 hung limp, head drooping against his chest. The smallest, barely 5, whimpered weakly, muffled by the gag across his mouth. Bruises bloomed across their skin, cheeks, arms, knuckles raw from struggling. Their small bodies looked swallowed by the shadows, fragile and out of place in the rotten shell of the shack. Ethan's throat went dry. For a moment the storm outside disappeared, the forest, the mud. Everything collapsed into this one room, the sight of innocence shackled and bleeding. He had seen death before, but this was worse. This was stolen life. Shadow crept forward, his growl melting into a whine. He pressed his nose gently against the hand of the oldest girl. At first, she flinched, then froze, staring down into his amber eyes. Something passed between them. Some recognition that this creature was not another monster. Her trembling hand brushed his fur, and for the first time, she let out a breath that wasn't a sob. "Easy," Ethan whispered, lowering his gun. He moved quickly but gently, crouching to untie the smallest child first. The boy's wrists were raw, rope biting deep into the skin. Ethan's fingers worked fast, his jaw clenched to keep from cursing aloud at whoever had done this. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." The older girl tried to speak, her voice a rasp. They said they'd come back." Ethan swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into his tone. "Not while we're here." As he worked, his flashlight beam caught on something near the floor. A faint glint, half hidden in the shadows. He reached for it, pulling a small toy phone from beneath a collapsed board. The plastic was cracked, its buttons worn. He pressed one by instinct, and a sound spilled into the room. A lullaby. The tinny recording played a child's song, distorted but recognizable. sweet and soft, meant to soothe. But here, in this place, it was a cruel echo. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't left behind by accident. It was deliberate. Someone had recorded it, left it here, taunting the children with a mockery of comfort. The girl flinched at the sound, shaking her head violently. "Stop it, please. Turn it off." Ethan shut the toy off instantly, his jaw tight. His stomach burned with fury. Whoever had done this wasn't just cruel. They were calculated. He pocketed the phone carefully. Evidence. Proof of the monsters hiding behind this. Shadow pressed closer to the children, his body warm and solid. The youngest reached out, small fingers gripping his fur, clinging as though the dog were the only thing anchoring him to life. Shadow stood steady, accepting the weight without flinching. Ethan finished untying them, one by one. The boy stirred, groaning faintly, his head lolling against Ethan's shoulder when he lifted him free. He was weak, but breathing. Relief washed through Ethan, though it did nothing to ease the tight coil of dread in his gut. He looked at the girl. "Can you walk?" She nodded shakily, though her legs trembled beneath her. Shadow stayed close, his body brushing hers, steadying her steps as if he understood her fragility. Ethan scanned the room again, his light sweeping across mold-stained walls, broken furniture, scraps of rope. But it was the absence that struck him most, the absence of the people who had done this. The children had been left here like discarded possessions, but there was no sign of their captors, which meant they were still out there. Or watching, maybe waiting. His radio hissed when he tried again. Static. Nothing more. He cursed under his breath. Alone. But then his eyes caught something crumpled in the corner. A piece of paper, damp from rain leaking through the roof. He retrieved it, smoothing it open against his knee. Faded ink smeared across the page. But one thing was clear. An address. A warehouse on the outskirts. Ethan's pulse spiked. This was no random hideout. It was part of something bigger. He looked at the children huddled together now, Shadow standing guard beside them. The girl's hand rested on the shepherd's head, her fingers tangled in his fur as though afraid to let go. Ethan crouched, voice low, steady. "You're safe now. No one's hurting you again." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time they weren't only fear, they were something closer to hope. Outside, the rain drummed harder on the shack's roof, but inside, Ethan felt the storm shifting. They had found the first thread of something far darker than he had imagined, and Shadow, steady and certain, had led him to it. The shack groaned as the storm pressed against its walls, wind slipping through the cracks to whisper in low, eerie tones. The smell of damp wood and old mildew clung to the air, but underneath it lay something raw, fear. It radiated from the three children, their wide eyes fixed on Ethan and Shadow, as if uncertain whether to believe in salvation. Shadow moved first. Slowly, carefully, he padded toward the oldest girl. She stiffened, her chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. For a heartbeat, Ethan thought she might cry out. But then Shadow lowered his head and pressed his nose gently against her bound hand. The shepherd's warm breath fogged against her skin. She flinched once, then stilled. Her trembling fingers twitched, brushing against the coarse fur at his muzzle. The sound she released was not a sob, but a gasp, a fragile exhale as though some invisible weight had shifted. Shadow didn't move away. He stayed, amber eyes soft, ears tilted back in patience. He had a way of telling people the truth without words. I am not here to hurt you. I am here to stay. The girl's lip quivered. Then, for the first time since Ethan had entered, her tears fell, not jagged and frantic, but slow, quiet. Her small hand curled weakly into Shadow's fur, holding on as if he were the last solid thing left in the world. Ethan swallowed hard, his own chest tight. He had seen hardened men steady under Shadow's presence, but here, with this girl, the bond cut deeper. It was healing born in silence. "Good boy," Ethan murmured, his voice nearly lost beneath the patter of rain. He crouched and pulled his knife from his belt. The rope around the girl's wrists had dug into her skin, leaving angry welts. With steady hands, he sliced through the knots. The fibers loosened, then fell away. The girl whimpered softly, rubbing her wrists. She didn't let go of Shadow. "Easy," Ethan said gently, keeping his voice calm, steady. "You're all right now. You're safe." He moved to the younger boy slumped in the chair. The child's head lolled against his chest, but his shallow breathing reassured Ethan he was alive. Rope fell away from small wrists and ankles, his skin equally raw. Ethan lifted the boy into his arms for a moment, feeling how frighteningly light he was, then eased him down onto a blanket pulled from a corner of the shack. The youngest child remained tied, wide-eyed, and silent. Ethan knelt in front of him, working quickly at the knots. "Almost done, buddy," he whispered. "Just a minute more." When the last rope fell, the boy scrambled off the chair, straight into Shadow's side. His small hands clutched at the shepherd's vest, burying his face into fur dampened by the storm. Shadow stood perfectly still, letting the child press close, his tail giving the faintest wag. Ethan took a breath, steadying himself. These moments mattered. The difference between terror and hope could be as simple as how calm his voice stayed. "Listen to me," he said, looking at the three children. "No one's going to hurt you again. Not while we're here." The girl, still clinging to Shadow, looked up at him. Her voice shook. They said they'd come back." Ethan's jaw clenched, anger flaring like heat in his chest, but he softened his voice. "Not tonight. Not ever again, if I have anything to say about it." As he rose, his light caught something near the broken leg of a chair. Paper, damp and crumpled. He bent, prying it free from where it had been wedged beneath the wood. Ink bled across the surface, but words still clung to the page. An address scrawled in hurried strokes. He recognized the area. It was an industrial strip on the outskirts, lined with warehouses. His gut twisted. That explained everything. This shack wasn't the heart of it. It was only a holding point, a place to keep victims until they were moved. The real operation lay elsewhere. He folded the paper carefully, slipping it into his pocket. Evidence, yes, but also a map, a thread leading deeper into the dark. He turned back to the children. Their small frames looked so fragile against the ruined backdrop of the shack. Yet their eyes, though clouded with terror, still clung to Shadow, and now to him, as though some ember of trust had been lit. Ethan crouched again, meeting their gaze level. His voice was soft, firm. "You're safe now. No one's hurting you again." The girl's lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. Instead, she pressed her forehead gently against Shadow's, tears streaking down her cheeks. The boy on the blanket stirred, eyelids fluttering, and the youngest tightened his grip on the shepherd's vest. Shadow stood steady beneath their touch, as immovable as a rock in a storm. Ethan let the silence linger, because sometimes silence said more than words ever could. He knew this night was only beginning. The address in his pocket burned like a brand. There were more children, more horrors waiting. But here, in this moment, he allowed himself to feel the smallest measure of peace. Because 3 lives had been pulled from the dark, because Shadow had found them, and because promises, once made, were not meant to be broken. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time Ethan pulled the cruiser up to the precinct. The headlights cut pale beams through the mist, illuminating the worn steps where officers hurried to meet him. Inside the back seat, the 3 children sat huddled together beneath a blanket he'd found in the trunk, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. And Ethan killed the engine and turned toward them, his voice gentler than it had been all night. "You're safe here. These people will take care of you now." The oldest girl nodded faintly, still clinging to Shadow's vest. Only when Shadow shifted to hop out of the cruiser did she finally let go, her hand lingering in the air as if reluctant to sever that tether of safety. Ethan felt the ache of that gesture settle deep in his chest. Detective Harper appeared at the door, eyes widening as she took in the state of the children. "Jesus, Ethan!" "No time," he cut her off, pressing the damp scrap of paper into her hand. "There's an address. Warehouse District, out by Grey Ridge's edge. That's where the trail leads." "Ethan, you can't." But he was already striding back to the driver's side. The children were ushered inside by officers and medics. Shadow leapt back into the passenger seat, shaking water from his coat, eyes already sharp with focus. Ethan gripped the wheel, his voice low, almost to himself. "This isn't finished. Not yet." The city gave way to the outskirts in less than 20 minutes. Asphalt turned to patched concrete, then to gravel, the kind of road only trucks bothered with. The drizzle slicked everything in silver, neon signs fading behind him until nothing but shadowed fields stretched toward the horizon. Shadow sat forward, nose to the crack of the window, drawing in every scent. His ears twitched, his muscles tense. The first sight of the warehouse stopped Ethan cold. It rose from the dark like some ancient relic abandoned by time, a hulking skeleton of corrugated steel and rust, its gates sagging on twisted hinges. Shipping containers were stacked haphazardly along the fence line, their sides scarred with graffiti and weather stains. Windows were blacked out, boarded or broken, leaving only jagged teeth of glass that reflected the thin glow of the cruiser's headlights. Ethan cut the engine and let silence roll in. The rain dripped from gutters, tapping on metal like a clock ticking down. He could feel it, the weight of the place, something alive in its stillness. "This place has secrets that breathe," he muttered, his own voice startling him in the quiet. Shadow's ears pricked at the sound, but the shepherd didn't move his gaze from the gates. His body leaned slightly forward, tail low and stiff, a hunter's posture. Ethan recognized it well. Shadow was telling him the truth. Danger was waiting. Ethan sat back against the seat, hand brushing over the scar on his forearm. Afghanistan had taught him how places could hold ghosts, how walls soaked up suffering until you felt it in your bones. Tonight, that same cold familiarity crawled over his skin. He checked his weapon, the metallic click loud in the silence, then pulled on a tactical vest from the trunk. The Velcro straps bit into his shoulders as he adjusted them, the ritual steadying his nerves. Shadow whined softly, impatient. "Easy, boy. We'll go in smart." The cruiser sat dark as Ethan killed the lights, leaving them shrouded in the gray wash of drizzle and moonlight. They moved together, man and dog, toward the gate. The metal sagged under Ethan's hand, groaning as he pushed it just wide enough to slip through. The air inside smelled of rust and stagnant water, tinged with something faintly metallic, almost like old blood. Every instinct screamed at him that they were trespassing on something that wanted to stay hidden. Shadow padded ahead, paws silent on the gravel. He paused near a container, nose pressed to the corner seam, his low growl vibrating in the night air. Ethan tensed, scanning the shadows, but saw nothing yet. Only the rain dripping from the rusted ridges above. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, though he knew Shadow didn't need the order. The shepherd lived for this bond, this tether invisible but unbreakable. He reached the warehouse wall and pressed his back against it. Up close, the building loomed even larger, steel panels warped by years of weather, streaks of rust bleeding downward like old scars. A broken light fixture dangled above the side entrance, swinging faintly with each gust of wind, its squeal like a cry in the storm. Ethan's hand closed over the door handle. It was cold, slick with rain. For a long moment, he just listened. The drip of water, the faint creak of metal, the slow, steady breath of his dog. Am I too late? The thought came sharp and unbidden. Were the children already gone? Already swallowed by the network Vargas had hinted at? His stomach tightened. Failure wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not with those faces still burned into his mind. Shadow's head lifted, ears high. His gaze locked onto the door, then flicked back to Ethan, waiting for the signal. The shepherd's chest expanded with a sharp breath, a silent plea to move. Ethan exhaled slowly, hand tightening on the grip of his gun. The door groaned under the pressure as he eased it open, the darkness inside yawning wide like the mouth of something alive. "This is it," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Then he stepped across the threshold, Shadow at his side, into the heart of the secrets that waited. The air inside the warehouse was colder than the night outside, heavy with the smell of rust, oil, and something fouler, an odor that clung to the back of Ethan's throat like rot. His flashlight beam cut a thin swath through the gloom, dancing over stacked crates, broken machinery, and sagging tarps. The vastness of the place swallowed every sound, his boots echoing against the concrete in uneven rhythms. Shadow moved like a phantom, each pawfall barely audible. His nose skimmed the ground, tail rigid, his every muscle tuned for the hunt. Ethan trusted the shepherd's instincts more than his own eyes. When Shadow slowed, Ethan slowed. When Shadow froze, Ethan's fingers slid closer to the trigger of his Glock. For a few moments, only silence reigned, the distant drip of water from a leaking pipe, the faint groan of old beams shifting in the rafters. Then, movement, a shuffle too heavy to belong to a rat. Shadow's head snapped to the left, ears pricked, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Ethan didn't have time to speak before the darkness came alive. Figures stepped out from behind the crates, 3, 4, maybe more. Armed men with rifles cradled in their hands, eyes gleaming under the faint spill of moonlight through broken windows. "Drop it!" one barked, his voice rough with command. Ethan's pulse spiked, but his stance didn't falter. His flashlight swept over them, catching the shine of gun barrels, outnumbered, pinned. Then Shadow exploded into motion. The shepherd lunged before the nearest guard could react, his body a blur of muscle and teeth. The man cried out as Shadow clamped down on his arm, the rifle clattering to the floor. The shepherd's growl thundered in the cavernous space, primal and unyielding. The ambush broke into chaos. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks ricocheting through the metal halls like thunder trapped in a cage. Ethan dove behind a stack of crates, returning fire with quick, precise bursts. Each shot sent echoes spiraling upward, the smell of gunpowder thickening the air. Sparks flew as bullets tore into rusted steel. Splinters of wood rained down where a crate exploded near his head. Ethan ducked lower, heart hammering. He stole a glance. 2 men advancing from the right, another circling wide. Shadow still had the first guard pinned, his jaws locked, but Ethan knew he couldn't hold forever. Ethan fired, the recoil jolting through his arms. One of the advancing men staggered back, clutching his shoulder before crumpling. The second returned fire, rounds tearing into the crates just inches from Ethan's skull. He shifted, rolling to a new angle, his body moving on instincts sharpened in sand and smoke, half a world away. Afghanistan had been deserts and ambushes in villages. Tonight was rust and rain, but the rhythm of survival was the same. Breathe, aim, fire. Another shot rang out. Ethan's, and the second man fell, his rifle clattering uselessly across the floor. But the fight wasn't done. Shadow released his grip only when the first guard slumped unconscious, then wheeled with lethal focus toward the next threat. His paws hammered against the concrete, nails scraping as he sprinted. The man barely had time to swing his weapon before Shadow collided with him, knocking him flat. Teeth found flesh again, and his scream fractured the chaos. Ethan surged from cover, scanning for the last figure he'd seen slipping wide. The silence between gunshots was worse than the noise, too quiet, too calculated. Then a muzzle flash lit the dark from above, someone on the catwalk. The shot missed Ethan's head by inches, slamming into the wall behind him. He dove, rolling across the floor, pain lancing up his shoulder as he hit hard. His flashlight skittered away, leaving him with only slivers of moonlight. He fired upward, sparks bursting where the bullet hit steel. The man cursed, scrambling along the catwalk. Another shot, another flash. Ethan gritted his teeth, shifted position, waited for the rhythm of footsteps. He squeezed the trigger. The body hit the metal grate with a sickening clang, then tumbled through the gaps of the broken railing, landing hard on the floor below. The sound echoed through the cavern like a final punctuation. Breathing hard, Ethan scanned the warehouse. The echoes of gunfire ebbed, replaced by the ringing in his ears. The smell of cordite burned his nostrils. Shadow stood panting over the subdued guard, muzzle flecked with blood, eyes glowing with untamed fury, but body steady, waiting for Ethan's command. "Shadow, off!" Ethan called, firm but controlled. The shepherd released his grip, stepping back, but keeping his eyes fixed on the writhing man. His chest heaved, tongue lolling slightly, but the fire in his gaze never dimmed. Ethan moved quickly, kicking rifles out of reach and checking pulses. 2 men were dead, 2 alive but incapacitated. Another lay moaning, clutching his shredded arm. They weren't common thugs, too disciplined, too coordinated. And if this was only the welcoming party, what waited deeper inside? Ethan leaned against the crate for a moment, the weight of it all pressing into his chest. His breath fogged in the cold air, his hands still trembling faintly from adrenaline. He glanced at Shadow, who shook himself once, the chain of saliva glinting in the dim light. The shepherd's body language was clear. "We keep moving." Ethan nodded, muttering under his breath. "Yeah, boy. No turning back now." He reloaded, the metallic click ringing sharp in the emptiness. The warehouse loomed ahead, shadows stretching deeper, darker. Beyond them lay answers, or worse, truths. Either way, they had to be faced. Together, man and dog stepped over the fallen guards and pressed forward into the belly of the warehouse, where the real heart of the operation waited. The deeper Ethan and Shadow pushed into the warehouse, the heavier the silence grew. The echo of their boots and paws mingled with the faint drip of water through the roof, each sound amplified in the cavernous dark. The firefight behind them was already fading into memory, replaced by the steady thrum of adrenaline in Ethan's veins. They reached a wide chamber at the warehouse's core. The air was thicker here, tinged with sweat, oil, and the copper tang of blood. Light from a single hanging bulb swayed overhead, casting long, warped shadows across the floor. And then Ethan saw him. A man stood waiting in the middle of the room, broad-shouldered, his presence like a predator at rest. His leather jacket was stained at the collar, his dark hair slicked back. His eyes glittered in the half-light, cold, calculating, untouched by fear. "Officer Cole," the man drawled, his voice gravel-edged. "I was wondering when the storm would deliver you to my doorstep." Ethan lifted his gun, steady and silent. "Vargas." The man smiled thinly, hands spread in mock surrender. "Guilty as charged, though you won't find paperwork with my name on it. That's the beauty of shadows. We don't leave fingerprints." Shadow growled low, circling, his teeth bared. Vargas's gaze flicked to the shepherd, a faint flicker of amusement crossing his lips. Beautiful dog, fierce eyes. "They always send their best to fight me, and still, I'm here." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had heard stories about Vargas, the shadow of Grey Ridge, local leader of the network, ruthless, careful, untouchable. Every thread in the investigation had led here. On the ground. Now. Ethan's voice carried no give, but Vargas only chuckled, stepping forward into the circle of light. His hands dropped, slow and deliberate. "Guns," he said, his smile twisting. "Always guns. What happened to men settling things with their own hands?" The insult landed, sharp and personal. Ethan's finger brushed the trigger. But then Vargas lunged, faster than expected, knocking the gun aside. The weapon clattered across the concrete. Shadow barked, ready to spring, but Ethan raised a hand. "Back." His command cracked like a whip. This was his fight. Vargas grinned, teeth bared like a wolf's. Then the first punch flew. Ethan caught it against his forearm, the impact rattling his bones. He countered with a blow to Vargas's ribs, but the man absorbed it, retaliating with a headbutt that split Ethan's lip. Pain bloomed sharp and hot, copper filling his mouth. They collided like forces of nature, fists hammering, bodies slamming against crates and steel beams. Ethan's military training gave him precision, but Vargas fought with the rage of a man who had carved his way through alleys and prisons. Each strike was raw, brutal, born of survival. A punch glanced Ethan's jaw, sending stars exploding across his vision. He staggered, caught himself, then drove his shoulder into Vargas's chest, slamming him hard into the wall. Dust rained from the rafters above. "Why the kids?" Ethan spat, breath ragged. Vargas laughed through bloodied lips, his teeth red and shining. "Because they're currency. Pure, untraceable. And no matter how many you save, more will always be taken." Ethan's fist connected with his jaw, the crack echoing. But Vargas only smiled wider, blood dripping down his chin. "You don't get it, Cole," he hissed. "You're fighting a hydra. Cut off one head, two grow back. Kill me, and another takes my place. We're bigger than this warehouse, bigger than this city." The words coiled in Ethan's gut like poison. He struck again, rage behind the blow, but Vargas absorbed it, grappling him close. They struggled, locked in a deadly dance, until Ethan wrenched free and drove his knee into Vargas's stomach. The man doubled over, gasping, but still laughing. That mocking sound filled the chamber, bouncing off the walls like a curse. Shadow barked, snapping the air, every muscle straining to join the fight. Ethan held firm, his chest heaving. He couldn't let Vargas win, not with fists, not with fear. With one final surge, Ethan tackled him to the ground. His forearm pressed against Vargas's throat, pinning him hard against the concrete. The man thrashed, but Ethan's weight held. Enough, Ethan growled, his voice a snarl born from exhaustion and fury. He reached for the cuffs clipped to his belt, snapping them around Vargas's wrists with finality. The steel clicked shut, sharp as a gunshot. Vargas wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Still, his grin never faltered. Cuff me, drag me through your courts. It won't matter. You've only woken something you can't put back to sleep. Ethan forced him upright, muscles screaming from the fight. Vargas's laughter followed, guttural and relentless, as though he knew some secret Ethan couldn't yet touch. Shadow circled them both, teeth bared, his growl never ceasing. The shepherd's amber eyes burned holes into Vargas, as if he too understood that this man was only a symptom, not the disease. Ethan shoved Vargas toward the door, gun retrieved and pressed firmly against his back now. The fight was done. But the war, Ethan knew, was only beginning. Vargas's laughter echoed long after the storm outside swallowed it. The warehouse was no longer silent. Sirens wailed outside, red and blue lights washing over the rusted walls like the heartbeat of a wounded city. The storm had begun to ease, the steady drizzle tapping gently against the broken skylights. But the air inside remained heavy, clinging with the weight of everything uncovered. Ethan leaned against a steel pillar, sweat and rain running together down his face. His chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. Shadow sat pressed against his leg, the shepherd's head low, ears drooping, chest heaving from exertion. For once, the dog didn't scan the shadows or growl warnings. He simply stayed close, a silent anchor in the chaos. Voices filled the chamber now. Officers called to each other as they pried open containers, cut locks, and shifted crates. The screech of metal hinges gave way to cries. Small, fragile voices, breaking the dark. Ethan forced himself upright, his body aching from the fight with Vargas, and moved closer. The first compartment cracked open, revealed two children huddled together, their eyes wide, faces pale. They blinked against the sudden light, shrinking back until medics eased forward with blankets and gentle words. "Easy now. You're safe," one medic whispered, kneeling as he wrapped a thermal blanket around a boy who couldn't have been older than 6. Ethan's throat tightened. He turned as another container was forced open, and another. Each time, the same scene unfolded. Small figures, starved and bruised, carried out into the storm's dim light. Some cried softly. Others were too weak even for tears. By the time the 5th container had been emptied, Ethan had lost count. A dozen, maybe more. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a graveyard that hadn't yet claimed its dead. Shadow let out a low whine, pressing closer to Ethan's leg. His amber eyes followed every stretcher, every trembling child wrapped in a medic's arms. The shepherd's body sagged, his tail still, as if the weight of what they had found pressed even against him. Ethan lowered a hand, resting it on Shadow's head, fingers brushing the damp fur. "You did good, boy," he murmured, though the words tasted bitter. Because for every child saved tonight, he couldn't stop thinking of how many hadn't been. A medic passed close by, carrying a girl no older than 8. Her thin arm dangled limply, a hospital bracelet still around her wrist. Ethan's eyes followed her, and in that instant, memory tore through him like shrapnel. Another girl, another night, another storm. He was 12 when his sister vanished. She had been walking home from school, a shortcut through the park she always promised him she'd be careful with. She never came back. For years afterward, he had woken to the sound of his mother crying in the kitchen, his father staring out windows that only reflected absence. The police had filed their reports, searched the alleys, but no answers ever came. No closure. Just silence. Ethan closed his eyes, the memory gripping his chest like a vice. He could still see her face, bright, laughing, the way she had promised to teach him to ride a bike properly when the weather cleared. A promise unkept, a promise stolen. And now, as the children filed out of the warehouse, her ghost walked with them. Shadow nudged his knee gently, grounding him back to the present. Ethan blinked hard, forcing his breathing steady. He couldn't afford to drown in memories. Not here. Not now. These kids needed someone standing tall. Someone who could promise them a future. Detective Harper approached, her raincoat slicked to her frame, her face drawn and pale. "We're still counting," she said softly. "So far, 23, maybe more." "God, Ethan." Her voice faltered, breaking beneath the enormity. Ethan's gaze flicked to Vargas, sitting cuffed against a steel beam, a medic patching the gash across his temple. Even restrained, the man wore his arrogance like armor. His head tilted back, a smirk tugging his split lips, as if none of this mattered, as if Ethan hadn't just ripped open his operation. That smirk crawled under Ethan's skin, but he held his tongue. Rage could wait. The children couldn't. "I need a count," Ethan said, his voice hoarse but steady. "And I want every ID we can pull. Photos, fingerprints, whatever we can get." Harper nodded quickly, moving off to relay the orders. Ethan turned back to the medics, to the endless line of stretchers and blankets. His heart twisted with every pale face, every fragile body carried out into the rain. He knew these children would never be the same. No matter how much safety they were given, no matter how many therapists, they would carry these shadows forever. And maybe that was why his sister's face haunted him now, because he knew if she had been taken into something like this, there was no chance she'd ever come home whole. The storm outside rumbled low, thunder rolling like a warning. Ethan rubbed his hand over his scarred forearm, then crouched beside Shadow, his knees popping in protest. The shepherd looked up at him, ears still lowered, amber eyes solemn. "You knew, didn't you?" Ethan whispered. "You pulled me here. You weren't going to stop until I saw." Shadow pressed his muzzle against Ethan's chest, exhaling a long breath as if answering without words. The simple weight of him, the steady warmth, reminded Ethan why he trusted this dog more than he trusted himself. Shadow's instincts had saved lives tonight. His own instincts would have missed it. Ethan let his eyes close briefly, the sound of children crying and medics shouting filling the chamber. It was chaos, yes, but it was also proof. Proof that the fight wasn't hopeless. Proof that they could drag the lost out of the dark. When he opened his eyes again, Vargas was watching him. Bloodied lips curled in a smile that held no mirth. The man mouthed something silently across the distance. Ethan didn't need to hear it to understand. This isn't the end. No. Ethan knew it wasn't. But as another child was carried past him, tiny fingers clutching desperately at a medic's sleeve, he swore under his breath. Not one more. Not if I can stop it. He rose slowly, Shadow standing with him, the dog's fur brushing his leg. Together they turned back toward the storm, toward the flashing lights and waiting ambulances. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to whisper the name he had buried deep. Clara. His sister's name. The syllables cracked in his throat like glass. "I couldn't find you," he whispered to the night. "But maybe I can find them." Shadow leaned gently against him, silent, steady. And Ethan Cole, weary officer and broken brother, clenched his fists and stepped back into the storm, knowing this fight had only begun. The chaos of the rescue had begun to subside. Ambulances rolled away into the storm, their sirens fading into the distance. What remained inside the warehouse was quieter now, an unsettling quiet broken only by the murmur of investigators combing through the ruins of Vargas's empire. Ethan stood near the center of the chamber, Shadow pressed at his side, watching as evidence technicians cracked open crates and rifled through desks shoved against the far wall. What they found wasn't drugs or weapons or anything so straightforward. It was worse. "Lieutenant," one officer called, waving him over. His gloved hands held a thick ledger, its cover stained with oil. "You need to see this." Ethan stepped forward, taking the book carefully. The pages were filled with neat, angular handwriting. Names, dates, locations. Each line paired with numbers that stretched into the thousands. Money. Transactions recorded in cold precision. He flipped deeper, scanning entry after entry, the pit in his stomach growing heavier. These weren't just local records. Cities beyond Grey Ridge appeared in the margins. Chicago, Houston, even ones across the border. The network stretched wider than he had imagined. Another officer approached, arms laden with maps curled and stained. She spread them across a crate, smoothing the damp paper under her palms. Ethan leaned over, Shadow sniffing curiously at the edges. The maps weren't of Grey Ridge alone. They showed shipping routes across states, highways marked in thick red ink, border towns circled, ports underlined, trails like veins connecting cities, counties, even countries. And in the corner of every page, stamped or scrawled, was the same image. A serpent encircling a globe, its body coiled tightly, its head devouring its own tail. Ethan froze, staring at the mark. It wasn't the kind of graffiti thugs left behind. It was deliberate, symbolic. "What the hell is that?" Harper asked, stepping up beside him. Her voice was low, uneasy. Ethan shook his head slowly. "Not Vargas. Not just him. This is bigger." He turned back to the ledgers, flipping until he found the same symbol stamped in faded ink across several entries. Whoever these people were, they weren't sloppy. They left this mark with intention, a signature hidden in plain sight. Shadow growled faintly, his amber eyes fixed on the papers as though even he sensed the weight of it. Ethan rested a hand on the shepherd's neck, grounding himself as the chill crept up his spine. "This isn't a gang," Ethan said finally, his voice hard. "This is a machine." Vargas was just one gear. The words hung heavy in the air. Harper ran a hand through her damp hair, her face pale under the flickering lights. "Then who's running it? Who signs off on this?" Ethan lifted his gaze back to the serpent encircling the globe. His throat tightened. Whoever it was, they weren't afraid of being found. They wanted to be remembered, feared. The image wasn't just a logo. It was a promise. He closed the ledger with a snap and exhaled slowly, the sound harsh in the cavernous space. The children carried out tonight were proof Vargas's hands were dirty. But this symbol, this reached far beyond Grey Ridge, far beyond him. For a brief moment, Ethan's mind slipped back to his sister, her disappearance, the silence that followed, the unanswered questions that had gnawed at his family. Could it have been tied to something like this? A network vast enough to erase people without a trace, to hide them in ledgers and maps, as if they were nothing but figures to be moved. The thought hollowed him. Shadow pressed closer, his head nudging against Ethan's thigh, as if reminding him not to drift too far into memory. Ethan drew in a deep breath, grounding himself in the present. "Bag everything," he ordered the evidence team, his tone clipped and sharp. "Every page, every map, every file. Triple copies, no leaks." I don't want a scrap of this going missing." The officers nodded quickly, working faster now, shoving documents into sealed bags. Vargas, still cuffed and slouched against the wall under guard, chuckled when he saw Ethan clutching the ledger. Blood streaked his face, his lips swollen, but his eyes glittered with spite. "You think you've won," he rasped, voice thick with arrogance. "But all you've done is open your eyes to the storm. You'll never shut them again." Ethan turned, his jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, he wanted to silence that laugh with his fists, but Shadow growled, stepping forward, his presence enough to still Vargas into silence. Instead, Ethan lifted the ledger, holding the weight of it in his hands. "This storm has a name," he said quietly, "and I'm going to find it." As he handed the book to an officer for evidence processing, his gaze returned to the serpent. The ink was faded, but it might as well have been carved into stone. Coiled around the globe, endless and consuming, it mocked him with its certainty. A network without end, a hydra with too many heads. For the first time that night, Ethan felt the faint tremor of fear slip under his ribs, not for himself, but for how deep this rot went, and how much it would cost to cut it out. Shadow barked once, sharp and decisive, as if answering his unspoken thoughts. Ethan looked down at him, and despite the storm raging outside, despite the chill of what they had uncovered, he allowed the smallest flicker of resolve to kindle in his chest. Whatever this serpent was, however far it reached, they had carved a wound into its flesh tonight. And he wasn't done cutting. The warehouse was a different kind of battlefield now. The gunfire had stopped, the children were gone, and the evidence was being packed into sealed bags and loaded into vans. What remained was the aftermath, cold, sharp, and heavy. Ethan stood near the main doors, the drizzle outside turning into sheets of rain once more. Lightning flashed beyond the broken windows, casting the skeletal beams of the warehouse into jagged silhouettes. The storm had circled back, like a reminder that nothing about this night was finished. Shadow sat at his side, soaked fur clinging to his frame. His ears drooped, but his eyes stayed sharp, never leaving the cluster of officers preparing Vargas for transport. The man had been patched up enough to move. Blood still marked his temple, his split lip, but his arrogance hadn't been touched. If anything, it had only grown. Two officers hauled Vargas to his feet, the chains at his wrists rattling with each step. His smirk cut through the exhaustion in the room. He moved with the swagger of a man who believed captivity was temporary, like he already had one foot back in the shadows. As they passed, Vargas caught Ethan's gaze. The smirk curled wider, teeth glinting under the dull glow of floodlights. "Cole," he rasped, his voice a broken growl that forced Ethan to lean closer to hear. Shadow bristled instantly, his growl low, thunderous. Ethan steadied him with a hand, though his own muscles tightened with unease. He didn't want to hear Vargas, and yet he couldn't turn away. Vargas tilted his head, eyes gleaming with something darker than triumph. He leaned just close enough, chains clinking, breath hot with copper and defiance. "You haven't even touched the roots," he whispered, voice dripping like poison. "Wait until you see who waters them." The words slithered into Ethan's chest like ice. He stared, searching Vargas's bloodied face for even a flicker of jest. But the man's expression was calm, almost serene, as if he had just handed Ethan a gift he couldn't refuse. Then Vargas laughed, soft, guttural, mocking. The sound scraped at Ethan's nerves. It wasn't the laugh of a man defeated. It was the laugh of a man who knew he was only one link in a chain that stretched far beyond these rusted walls. "Move him!" Harper barked, her voice cutting through the tension. The officers dragged Vargas forward, out into the storm. His laughter lingered, echoing down the hollow halls long after his figure disappeared into the rain. Ethan didn't follow immediately. He stood rooted in place, the whisper clawing at him, the storm outside beating against the roof like a drum. The roots, the one who waters them. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. He had been in combat zones before. He had faced ambushes, lost men, buried friends. But this was different. This enemy wasn't in the open. It was beneath the soil, woven through the foundation of everything. An enemy that grew back stronger each time you cut it down. Shadow pressed his muzzle against Ethan's thigh, a soft whine escaping his throat. Ethan glanced down, meeting the shepherd's eyes. Loyal, steady, unflinching. The dog didn't understand the words Vargas had spoken, but he understood the shift in Ethan's body, the tension, the dread, the silent fury. Ethan crouched, resting his forehead briefly against Shadow's. Rainwater dripped from the shepherd's coat onto his gloves. "We're in deep now, boy," Ethan whispered. "Deeper than I thought." Lightning cracked, flooding the warehouse with white light. In that instant, Ethan imagined the serpent symbol burned into his mind, coiling around the globe, endless, consuming. He stood slowly, stepping out into the storm. The rain hit hard, soaking him instantly, plastering his hair to his forehead. Officers loaded Vargas into the back of a van, his mocking grin still fixed in place, even as the doors slammed shut. Ethan stayed outside long after the vehicles pulled away, rain dripping from his jaw, his thoughts circling like vultures. Vargas's warning gnawed at him, a rot he couldn't shake. He had won tonight. Dozens of children were freed, a warehouse dismantled, a leader in chains. And yet it felt hollow, incomplete, because Vargas had been right. Ethan hadn't touched the roots. He had only cut one branch, and the tree still grew, watered by hands hidden far above his reach. Shadow shook himself violently, spraying droplets, then pressed against Ethan's leg, looking up at him with expectant eyes. Waiting, anchoring. Ethan let out a breath that steamed in the cold air. He placed a hand on the shepherd's neck, the familiar weight grounding him in the storm. "All right, boy," he whispered, voice low, rough with exhaustion, but edged with resolve. "Lead the way." The rain poured harder, but Ethan felt the decision settle inside him, heavy and unmovable. Vargas's warning wasn't the end of this night. It was the beginning. The precinct smelled of wet wool and burnt coffee, the kind of scent that clung no matter how many storms swept through Grey Ridge. Ethan pushed through the double doors with Shadow padding close, the shepherd's coat still soaked from the night at Pier 47. The bullpen buzzed with paperwork and tired voices, but beneath it hummed something sharper, unease. Even Shadow sensed it, his ears flicking back, his body pressed closer to Ethan's leg. Detective Harper waited by the conference room, her face pale from exhaustion. She opened the door without a word. Inside, the fluorescence glared off the whiteboard crammed with maps, photographs, red string cutting across faces and places. Ethan slumped into a chair, Shadow curling at his boots, but Harper didn't waste time. "You need to step back," she said flatly, dropping a folder onto the table. "You've done enough. More than enough. Let the rest of us handle it." Ethan glanced at the folder. Too thin, too neat. A performance of an investigation, not the truth. He rubbed a hand across his face. "Step back. After what we saw last night?" Harper's jaw tightened. "The calls have already started. Command doesn't want this in the press. They're saying it'll cause panic, compromise cases, put lives at risk." He let out a bitter laugh. "What they mean is, it'll compromise their careers." She didn't deny it. You want me to ignore 23 kids pulled out of steel cages? Ethan leaned forward, his voice raw. To bury what we saw. You can't save them all, Ethan. The words hit harder than a bullet. His war years flashed back. Every lost civilian, every command briefing, where that same phrase had been tossed like a bandage. You can't save them all. He looked down at Shadow. The shepherd lifted his head, amber eyes steady, a silent contradiction. Ethan pressed his hand against the dog's damp fur. He hasn't lied to me yet. Harper's expression softened, but her voice held steel. If you keep pushing, you'll lose your badge. And once that happens, you won't help anyone. Ethan rose slowly. If the badge is the price for doing nothing, then it's not worth a damn. Harper stood too, caught between admiration and fear. You're going to tear yourself apart chasing this. Maybe, Ethan said. His hand tightened on Shadow's collar. But if I stop, who else will chase them? Thunder rattled the windows. Shadow pricked his ears toward the sound as if agreeing. Ethan turned away, his resolve already decided. We're not done. Not even close. The apartment was still when he opened the door. The storm had eased, but the air carried the scent of wet earth and electricity. Ethan tossed his jacket over a chair, dropped into the seat at his kitchen table, and stared at the documents scattered across the wood. The ledger from Vargas. Maps inked with circles, photographs smudged from rain. Shadow leapt onto the couch, circled once, then padded over and rested his head on Ethan's lap. The weight steadied him. Ethan brushed damp fur from his partner's brow. You always know when I'm slipping. He flipped the ledger open. Numbers and dates filled the pages, but all Ethan saw were faces. Children huddled in steel containers, their eyes hollow. Every line wasn't just a transfer, it was a stolen life. And everywhere, the serpent insignia slithered across margins like a brand. The Hydra. Vargas's warning echoed. You haven't even touched the roots. Hours slipped past. The clock ticked toward dawn. Ethan's body begged for sleep, but his mind refused. He picked up a grainy surveillance photo. Vargas shaking hands with a man half hidden by shadow. The caption dated it 6 months old. Ethan traced the blurred outline with his thumb. Whoever he was, he mattered. Maybe he was one of the hands watering the roots. Shadow shifted closer, pressing more weight into his lap. Ethan whispered, It doesn't end here, does it, boy? The shepherd blinked once, slow, resolute. Ethan exhaled. If Shadow wouldn't rest, neither would he. The phone shattered the silence. Its vibration rattled through the documents. Ethan froze. The screen glowed with a blocked number. He answered anyway. Cole. Static crackled, followed by a voice warped by a filter. Low, metallic, unhuman. You're in over your head, officer. But if you want the truth, listen carefully. Ethan stiffened, glancing at the window where rain streaked glass. Who is this? The voice ignored the question. Vargas was a pawn. The architect you're hunting doesn't live in warehouses. He lives in estates. Ashton Estate, outside the city limits. The name jolted Ethan. He'd seen it circled on the maps hours earlier, ink pressed so deep it tore the page. Shadow stirred, ears pricking, a low growl humming in his chest. Why tell me this? Ethan demanded. If you know, why not go to the FBI? The filtered voice rasped with amusement. Because you're reckless enough to follow the trail. Hand it to your superiors, and it vanishes. You know that. Click. The line went dead. Ethan sat frozen, staring at his reflection in the black screen. Hollow eyes, jaw tight. A man holding a match in a room drenched in gasoline. Shadow pressed against his knee, anchoring him. Ethan lowered the phone to the table and brushed his hand over the shepherd's head. "Ashton Estate," he whispered. The words tasted like iron. He thought of Harper, of the thin folder she'd dropped on the table, of commanders who told him to step back. If he took this tip through official channels, it would vanish into silence before the ink dried. Vargas's laughter rang in his skull. "You haven't even touched the roots." Ethan paced the narrow kitchen, documents scattered across the table. His gut screamed trap. Anonymous calls always were. But the other part of him, the soldier, the brother who had lost his sister to shadows decades ago, knew he couldn't ignore it. He crouched beside Shadow, eyes meeting the shepherd's amber gaze. "It's just you and me, partner. No one else we can trust." Shadow gave a soft whine, tail tapping once, like an oath. Ethan rose. The decision settled in his bones like stone. He shoved the ledger into his bag, along with spare ammo, a flashlight, and his sidearm. The weight of it all pressed heavy against his shoulder, but it felt like clarity. At the door, Shadow waited, ears pricked, eyes locked steady on him. Ready. Always ready. Ethan pulled his jacket tight and whispered, "Time to find out who waters the roots." He opened the door. The storm rushed in, sharp with rain. Together, man and dog stepped into the night, toward Ashton Estate, and whatever waited inside. The road to Ashton Estate cut through the countryside like a scar, flanked by skeletal trees bowed under storm winds. Ethan drove with headlights off, relying on lightning silver flashes to mark the way. Beside him, Shadow shifted restlessly, ears pricked, body tense, as though he already sensed what awaited them. The estate appeared out of the rain like a phantom, stone walls wrapped in iron, high and coiled with ivy. Security cameras winked with glassy eyes. Guards huddled at the gate under faintly glowing cigarettes. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Ethan killed the engine a quarter-mile back, the rain hammering the windshield. Every instinct screamed this was suicide, but Shadow's low growl anchored him. "All right, boy," he murmured, gripping the shepherd's collar. "This is where the trail leads." They slipped into the storm, rain soaking Ethan's jacket and plastering Shadow's coat until the shepherd looked cut from obsidian. Crawling through hedgerows, Ethan traced the sweep of cameras, spotting slivers of blind zones. At the lightning's flash, they darted forward, hugging the wall. At a section half swallowed by ivy, Ethan tested the vines. They held just enough. He climbed, adrenaline steadying his hands. Shadow followed with a powerful leap. Together they perched on the wall, gazing down at a courtyard lit by floodlights, guards patrolling, vehicles lined in rows, the mansion glowing faintly in the distance. Ethan exhaled. This wasn't Vargas's sloppiness. This was entrenched power. Vargas's words echoed. "You haven't even touched the roots." "We're walking into the serpent's nest," Ethan whispered. Shadow growled softly in reply. They dropped into mud, slipping along the hedges. The storm masked their movements, but every second stretched taut. Man and dog moved as one, silent, relentless. At last they reached the inner hedges. Ethan studied the mansion through sheets of rain. Somewhere inside was Ashton, the man who watered the roots of this empire. "No turning back now," Ethan whispered. Inside, the storm dulled to a heartbeat. The air smelled of leather and wood polish, but beneath it lingered rot. Gilded portraits lined the halls, long-dead aristocrats staring down with arrogance. Shadow padded silently, nose twitching, every muscle taut. At the end of a corridor, Ethan pushed open heavy oak doors. A vast study stretched before him. Shelves of leather-bound books, a chandelier casting soft light, a mahogany desk scattered with maps and papers. Not abandoned, left behind by someone too confident to hide them. Ethan sifted quickly. Financial transfers, shipping logs, container IDs, millions funneled across borders. This wasn't petty crime, it was global. The veins of a poisoned heart. Shadow circled the room, nails clicking, until he stopped at the shelves. Hackles rose. His nose pressed to the paneling. Ethan knelt, finding a faint seam, a hidden latch. A compartment creaked open. Passports. Dozens. Each with the face of a child. Smiling too wide, eyes too young, names foreign, erased. Ethan's throat closed. Every document was a life stolen, a child swallowed by the Hydra's network. Shadow pressed against him, whining low as if sharing the weight. At the bottom lay a thin folder stamped with the serpent insignia. Inside were photographs of officials, businessmen, politicians, faces paired with numbers and destinations. The routes weren't local. They were international, shielded by wealth. Vargas had spoken truth. Ethan sank into the leather chair, chest heaving. How do you fight this, boy? How do you cut down something this deep? Shadow's amber eyes locked on his, steady, defiant. The answer was clear. You cut one route at a time. He gathered the passports and folder into his bag, resolve hardening. Their arrogance, that no one would breach this fortress, would be their undoing. Then Shadow growled, low and sharp. Someone was coming. Ethan swept the desk clean, slid into the shadows of the shelves. The shepherd crouched low beside him, teeth bared, every sense coiled to strike. The door handle turned. The road to Ashton Estate cut through the countryside like a scar, flanked by skeletal trees bowed under storm winds. Ethan drove with headlights off, relying on lightning's silver flashes to guide the way. Beside him, Shadow shifted restlessly, ears pricked, body taut, as though he already sensed what awaited them. The estate rose from the hills like a phantom. Stone walls coiled in iron, cameras blinking from every corner, guards smoking under the gate's awning. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Ethan killed the engine a quarter-mile out. The rain hammered the windshield, drumming a warning. Every instinct screamed suicide, but Shadow's low growl anchored him. "This is where the trail leads," he whispered, gripping the shepherd's collar. They slipped into the storm, rain soaking Ethan's jacket and plastering Shadow's coat until he looked cut from obsidian. Crawling through hedgerows, Ethan mapped the camera's arcs, darting through blind zones. At a section half swallowed by ivy, he climbed, adrenaline steadying his hands. Shadow followed in a leap, and together they perched on the wall, gazing down at guards, vehicles, and the glowing mansion. "We're walking into the serpent's nest," Ethan murmured. Shadow growled softly in reply. They dropped into mud, moving as one, silent and relentless, until they reached the inner hedges. Ethan studied the mansion again. Somewhere inside was Ashton, the man who watered the roots of this empire. No turning back now. Inside, the storm dulled to a heartbeat. The air smelled of polish and leather, but beneath it lingered rot. Gilded portraits stared from the walls, eyes of long-dead aristocrats gleaming with arrogance. Shadow padded beside Ethan, nose twitching, every sense taut. At the end of a corridor, Ethan pushed into a vast study. Shelves of leather-bound books, chandelier glow, a mahogany desk strewn with maps and papers. Not abandoned, left behind by someone too confident to hide them. Financial transfers, shipping logs, millions funneled across borders. This was no small empire. It was global. Shadow circled until his nose pressed to a seam in the paneling. Ethan found the latch and pried it open. Passports spilled out, dozens. Children's faces, eyes bright, smiles forced, names erased, rewritten. His throat closed. Each document was a stolen life. At the bottom lay a folder marked with a serpent. Inside, officials, businessmen, politicians, tied to accounts and destinations. The roots weren't local. They stretched worldwide. Vargas had been telling the truth. "How do you fight this?" Ethan whispered. Shadow's amber eyes steadied him. One root at a time. He gathered the evidence into his bag. That arrogance, that no one could breach this fortress, would be their undoing. Then Shadow growled. Someone was coming. Ethan slipped into the shadows. The door creaked open. Daniel Ashton stepped inside. Tall, silver-haired, tailored suit. He moved with the calm of a man who owned every shadow in the room. His icy eyes locked on Ethan. "Well," Ashton said, smooth as silk. "I expected rats. Instead, I find a soldier who doesn't know when the war is lost." "It ends tonight," Ethan said, gun raised. Ashton smiled faintly. "Empire? You think it's too small? Do you really believe dogs and guns can topple what I've built?" Shadow's growl deepened, vibrating through the study. Ashton glanced at him with cold fascination. Magnificent. Loyal to the end. But loyalty is wasted on the doomed. Thunder split the sky. Rifles clicked behind Ethan. Guards poured into the doorway. "Drop the weapon," Ashton murmured. "Not a chance." The world fractured. Gunfire detonated through the study, glass and shelves exploding into clouds of dust. Ethan dove, shoulder slamming the floor, pain flaring. Shadow lunged, teeth sinking into a guard's arm, dragging him down in a scream of torn flesh. Ethan rolled behind the desk, firing controlled bursts. A guard crumpled. Another filled his place. Splinters stung his cheek. Shadow spun, intercepting a pistol raised at Ethan's flank, dragging its wielder into the smoke. "Stay low, boy," Ethan shouted, but loyalty burned brighter than self-preservation. He shoved the desk on its side for cover and yanked a smoke grenade from his belt. The hiss filled the room, choking fog, swallowing chandeliers and gunfire. Chaos erupted, shouts, confusion. Ethan crawled, Shadow close, striking from the haze. A silhouette rose. Ethan's pistol barked once, dropping him. Shadow's growl became a phantom in the smoke, followed by a scream. Lightning flashed, the battlefield lit in strobe. Ashton stood untouched, watching, hands clasped behind his back. Ethan's fury sharpened. "Shadow, with me." Together they pressed forward, striking, surviving. But reinforcements crashed through the doors. Ashton slipped through a hidden passage. Ethan glimpsed the movement and gave chase. They plunged into twisting corridors, the air damp, ceilings low, walls sweating with condensation. Ashton's footsteps echoed ahead, measured, unhurried, mocking. They descended into tunnels. The smell of rust and earth filled Ethan's lungs. At last, a cavernous chamber opened, lit by a single swinging bulb. Crates lined the walls, and Ashton stood at the far gate, pistol raised, not at Ethan, at Shadow. "Don't," Ethan roared. Ashton's voice was calm, venom wrapped in silk. Fitting the beast dies first. Loyalty makes the best leash. The pistol barked. Shadow lunged. His teeth clamped onto Ashton's wrist, wrenching the gun free. Metal clattered across stone. Ashton cried out, pinned under the shepherd's weight, until Ethan seized him, wrenching his arms back, snapping cuffs on his wrists. The serpent was caught. But Ashton's eyes gleamed with venom. "You think this matters?" His voice was raw but steady. "You've cut one head. The body will come for you." Ethan shoved him against the gate, jaw tight. "Then we'll keep cutting until nothing grows back." For the first time, Ashton faltered. Not fear, but recognition. Thunder roared above, shaking the chamber. Ethan looked at Shadow, soaked, panting, limping but unbroken. "Good boy," he whispered. Shadow pressed his head to Ethan's leg, eyes still locked on Ashton, growl simmering like a promise. The storm raged overhead. The serpent was chained. But Ethan knew this was no end. It was only the beginning. The fluorescent lights in the precinct's interrogation room buzzed faintly, their sterile glow casting long shadows across the steel table. It was a room built to strip men down to the bone. No windows, no comfort, only silence pressing from every wall. Yet Daniel Ashton sat shackled like a king on a borrowed throne. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt stained at the cuff with dried blood from Shadow's bite. Even in chains, he radiated composure. His silver hair was slicked back, his posture regal, his mouth curved in a smirk that never reached his eyes. Ethan sat opposite him, fists clenched beneath the table. Shadow waited outside. Rules, liability, regulations. But Ethan felt his absence gnawing at him. Detective Harper leaned against the wall, silent. They had agreed. Ashton only responded to Ethan, predator to hunter. "You're facing federal charges," Ethan said evenly. "Trafficking, kidnapping, organized crime. Cooperate, and maybe you'll live long enough to rot in a cell." Ashton chuckled softly. "Alive. Officer Cole, I'm more alive now than you realize. You think prison frightens men like me? Prisons are full of my friends." Ethan leaned forward. "You exploited children, families. You think your money will shield you from that? You still don't understand." Ashton tapped one finger against the table, deliberate. "Every family has a price. Every child has value. And every lawman," his gaze flicked toward Harper, "a leash." Harper stiffened, but Ethan stilled him with a glance. "You'll name names. Every contact, every buyer, every route." Ashton's smirk sharpened. "Which names would you like? The senator who praises justice on television, the philanthropist funding hospitals, the commissioner who signs your paychecks. All of them have dined at my table." The words slithered into the room like poison. Ethan's gut clenched. He had suspected corruption, but hearing it laid bare made the air heavier, the walls closer. "Lies," he said, though his certainty faltered. "You're a soldier," Ashton murmured. "You know when you're surrounded. Why do you think your radio failed that night? Why did the backup arrive late at the warehouse? Storm interference. Or did someone decide you were expendable?" The memory struck hard. The static, the silence, the endless wait for sirens. Ethan's jaw tightened. Outside the door, Shadow barked once, steady, a reminder. Ethan forced calm. "We've got your ledgers, your documents, the children you tried to erase." For the first time, Ashton's smirk wavered. His eyes hardened. "And yet," he whispered, "you still don't have the heart." Ethan frowned. "What heart?" "The Hydra lives because its heart beats elsewhere. Cut heads all you like, Cole. Until you find it, you've done nothing but make it angrier." The words burrowed deep, but Ethan stayed rooted. Violence was what Ashton wanted. Proof of weakness. Harper snapped. "Enough riddles. You'll talk. Everyone breaks eventually." Ashton leaned back, chains rattling. "You misunderstand. I don't need to break. The world already bends for me, and when it bends too far, men like you snap." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan rose slowly, leaning down until his face was inches from Ashton's. "Enjoy the smirk while you can, because when the storm comes, Shadow and I will be there, and we don't bend." For a heartbeat, something flickered in Ashton's eyes. Doubt or recognition. Then the mask returned. Ethan stepped out, slamming the door. His temples throbbed. Shadow pressed against his leg, whining softly, amber eyes steady. Ethan crouched, fingers burying in his partner's fur. "Good boy. We're not done. Not even close." Thunder cracked outside, rattling the precinct windows. Somewhere inside, Ashton smiled in silence. The cyber forensics lab glowed with the cold light of monitors. The air smelled of stale coffee and overheated electronics. Lines of code scrolled across screens, decrypted files unraveling into names, dates, accounts. "Cole," Harper called from the far side. "You'll want to see this." Ethan approached Shadow at his heel like a sentinel. On one monitor, a spiderweb diagram bloomed. Corporations, banks, shell companies, all connected by red threads. One analyst adjusted his glasses. "This isn't just Ashton's operation. These are his partners. Corporations, offshore firms, even government agencies. It's international." Another clicked open folders. And worse, communications between high-ranking officials, politicians, CEOs, law enforcement. They're not just aware of the network, they're feeding it. Ethan scanned the names. Senators, philanthropists, faces from the evening news, shaking hands with presidents, now tied to ledgers of blood. His stomach churned. "How deep does it go?" he asked. "Farther than we imagined," Harper said grimly. "Every head you cut, it grows back because the money never stops moving. They've built an infrastructure, shipping lanes, airlines, charities, even defense contracts." Ethan stared at the screens. The Hydra wasn't a myth. It lived, fed by greed across oceans. Shadow pressed closer, growling low, as if he too could smell the rot bleeding from the machines. Then another folder opened. Hundreds of passports filled the screen. Children's faces stared back, each paired with a number, a destination, a value. The room went silent. Ethan's voice broke. "This isn't a bust. It's a declaration of war." The analyst hesitated. "One more thing. A pattern. Every transaction routes through a node called the Conclave. We don't know who runs it, but the heart," Ethan finished. Ashton's words echoed. "Until you find it, you've done nothing but make it angrier." Ethan stepped back, chest heavy, and resolved to harden. "Then we go for the heart." Harper's face was grim. "If you keep chasing this, you're not just going after criminals. You're going after the people who decide which criminals get punished." "Then we bring light they can't control," Ethan said, resting a hand on Shadow's harness. "That light will burn you," Harper warned. "Then let it, as long as it reaches them first." The precinct's common room buzzed with late-night exhaustion until the television above the bulletin board flickered. An anchor's grave voice filled the room. Breaking news tonight. Questions arise surrounding Officer Ethan Cole of the Grey Ridge Police Department. Ethan froze. Conversations hushed. The screen showed grainy clips. Ethan leading Shadow into Ashton's estate. Gunfire in the warehouse. Children crying. No context, only suggestion. Sources claim Officer Cole acted recklessly, the anchor intoned. Allegations of property destruction, excessive force, even tampering with evidence. Was this justice or a vendetta? Murmurs rippled. Eyes turned toward Ethan, some sympathetic, others doubtful. Footage replayed, overlaid with a calm voiceover. When lawmen go rogue, who pays the price? Ethan's fists clenched. He had seen this tactic overseas, disinformation, twisting truth before it could spread. Ashton's allies were moving fast. Harper appeared beside him. They're framing you. Not a leak. A strike. Shadow pressed against Ethan's thigh, eyes steady. His hand found the shepherd's fur, grounding himself. On screen, the anchor declared, "Officials are calling for Officer Cole's suspension pending inquiry." Suspension. The first step. Discredit. Isolate. Then bury. "They want to choke this off before it spreads," Harper muttered. "They can smear my name," Ethan said, voice low but steady. "But they can't erase the truth." Shadow gave a soft growl, as if echoing him. Ethan crouched, whispering into his partner's ear. "It's just us again, boy. They can twist headlines, but they can't touch this. They can't touch what we know." The shepherd nudged his hand, tail giving a single slow wag. Ethan rose, shoulders squared. Behind him, the television droned lies. But he no longer listened. The Hydra had declared war. And in the bond between a man and his dog, Ethan found the strength to walk back into the storm. The night after the rain was unnervingly still, the city holding its breath. Ethan guided his unmarked sedan down a narrow side street. Shadow sprawled across the back seat, amber eyes tracking the blur of street lamps. For a fleeting moment, peace almost reached Ethan. The smear campaign, Ashton's venom, the weight of corruption, all hummed at the edge of his mind. But Shadow's quiet presence grounded him. Then the world erupted. A flash of white light bloomed on the passenger side, followed by a roar that split the night. The shockwave punched the car sideways, glass shattering into a rain of shards. Metal screamed as the blast lifted the sedan and spun it across the asphalt. Ethan slammed against the seatbelt, air ripped from his lungs. Shrapnel tore through the night air. A jagged piece of steel shot toward his chest, until Shadow moved. The shepherd hurled himself over the seat, knocking Ethan down. The fragment sliced across Shadow's flank and buried in the dashboard. His yelp split the night, raw and guttural, but he didn't falter. His body shielded Ethan until the storm of debris passed. "Shadow!" Ethan shoved the door open, coughing through smoke. "Out!" The shepherd leapt despite the wound, stumbling but upright. Ethan dragged him clear, just as flames licked the twisted frame of the car. The smell of burning fuel choked the air. He pressed frantic hands along Shadow's side, finding the gash, deep, bloody, but not fatal. Relief hit like a tide, tempered with rage. The blast crater still smoked. Asphalt blackened where a parked car had once stood. Too precise. Too perfect. If Shadow hadn't acted, Ethan would be gone. The radio crackled. Harper's voice barked. "Cole, we just picked up a blast. Are you alive?" Ethan raised it, voice ragged. "They tried to bury me. Ashton's people just sent a message." He looked down at Shadow, who stood with hackles raised, eyes burning toward the darkness. Ethan's reply came out steel. Message received. Neighbors spilled into the street, pale in the firelight. Sirens wailed in the distance. Ethan knelt beside Shadow, cupping the shepherd's head. "You saved me again, boy. I don't know how many times I'm going to owe you before this ends." Shadow pressed his muzzle into Ethan's palm, steadying him. Smoke curled into the night sky, the Hydra's unseen hand leaving its warning. Ashton had been right about one thing. This wasn't survival anymore. It was war. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting pale glow over folding chairs arranged in a circle. The storm whispered outside, but inside lingered something heavier, wounds that refused to close. Ethan sat forward, Shadow at his feet, hand resting on his back. Around him, Harper, arms crossed, two uniformed officers Ethan trusted with his life, and the families, survivors. Mrs. Alvarez clutched a rosary, her daughter rescued from a shack by pure chance. Mr. Donovan's knuckles were raw, his son still missing. Other parents sat scattered, eyes hollow but burning. Harper broke the silence. "If we do this, we do it without sanction. No brass, no backup. Some of our own are compromised. Once we move, we're ghosts." "That's why we can't wait," Ethan said, voice steady. "You all saw the news. They've already painted me as the villain. If we don't act now, the truth dies with us." Mrs. Alvarez's voice trembled, but her eyes blazed. "They tried to bury my little girl. She's alive because of you, and him." She nodded toward Shadow, who lifted his head at her voice. "If you think I'll sit by while they take more children, you're wrong. Tell me what you need." Her words cracked something open. Mr. Donovan leaned forward. "My boy is still out there. They won't silence me. If I have to drag every name you've found into the light myself, I will." Officer Ramirez spoke next. "I've got people I trust. Men and women who've lost faith in the brass, but not in justice. You say the word, we'll stand with you." Ethan's chest tightened. These weren't soldiers. They were grieving parents, worn cops, survivors. He looked at Shadow. The shepherd's tail thumped once, urging him forward. "Then here's the plan," Ethan said. "We use Ashton's files, the manifests, contacts, accounts. Harper and I handle logistics. Ramirez, bring only those you'd trust with your life. Families, you're the voice. They can smear me, but they can't silence you. Together, we shine light where they've built shadows." Mrs. Alvarez clutched her rosary. "If my voice saves one child, I'll shout until it breaks me." Shadow rose, padding into the center of the circle. His amber eyes swept each face, silent measure of their resolve. Harper's tone softened but carried steel. "This isn't just Ashton. We're going after money, politicians, private armies. Once we move, there's no going back." Mr. Donovan answered quietly. "There's no going back for us anyway." Silence fell, not of fear, but of shared resolve. Ethan breathed deep, feeling the weight settle into clarity. "Then we make our stand, not as cops, not as victims, as people who won't let them win." Shadow barked once, sharp and loud, reverberating like a vow. Tears welled in weary eyes, but hope flickered, fragile, dangerous, alive. Ethan placed a hand on Shadow's back. "They tried to silence us, tried to kill us, but they forgot something. We're still here, and we're not done." The storm battered the windows, as if to echo their pledge. And in that battered room, a small army was born. The old warehouse on Grey Ridge's edge became their war room. Maps and photographs littered corkboards, red string cutting paths across ports and dates. Laptops glowed with stolen manifests. The air smelled of damp concrete, stale coffee, oil from the shop next door. Ethan stood at the head of the table, Shadow at his side. Harper, Ramirez, officers and families leaned in, faces taut with exhaustion, but alight with purpose. Ethan tapped the map. The next transfer's Pier 47, midnight. Containers marked agricultural exports. Inside, children, dozens. Gasps broke the silence. Mrs. Alvarez whispered a prayer. Mr. Donovan's eyes shone wet with rage and hope. Security? Harper asked. Private contractors, Ethan said, armed and trained. If we call it in, those containers vanish. This is on us. Ramirez's jaw set. Then we hit fast, hard. Ethan outlined the plan. 2 teams. Harper and Ramirez draw guards west. I'll flank east with Shadow. Priority is the kids. Nothing else matters. Mrs. Alvarez's voice quavered. Bring them home. Ethan's nod was firm. Logistics followed. Gear, radios, fallback routes. But his gaze drifted to Shadow. The shepherd sat alert, ears pricked, stitches hidden beneath bandages, scarred but steady, ready. When the others left to prepare, Ethan opened a duffel bag. Inside lay a new tactical vest, matte black, stitched with police K9 across the back. He lifted it, fingers lingering. Come here, boy. Shadow stepped forward. Ethan knelt, sliding the vest over his back, tightening straps with care. His hand brushed the scarred flank, reminder of the shrapnel, of how close death had come. He looked into Shadow's eyes. Amber locked with blue, steady and unyielding. This is our stand. They'll come with everything they've got, but we're not backing down. Shadow pressed his head to Ethan's chest, warm breath against damp fabric. Ethan closed his eyes, hand buried in fur. You've saved me more times than I can count. But tomorrow isn't about me. It's about every child still locked in the dark. We end this. Together. The shepherd rumbled low, pulling back to stand tall, armored now, ready. Ethan rose with him, gaze fixed on the map one last time. The storm rattled the doors. It felt like the city itself, braced for what was to come. He gathered his rifle, checked the chamber, set it beside Shadow's leash. His voice cut through the silence, low but resolute. They wanted a war. Now they'll get one. And with Shadow armored at his side, Ethan knew that whatever waited at Pier 47, they would face it as they always had, shoulder to shoulder, into the storm. The shipping yard at Pier 47 crouched in darkness, cranes and containers looming like giants against the storm-streaked sky. Diesel, salt, and rust hung in the air. Floodlights flickered along the perimeter, but most of the yard lay drowned in shadow. Ethan crouched with Harper and Ramirez behind stacked crates, their small force scattered across the perimeter. Radios crackled with clipped whispers, sharp with tension. Shadow crouched low beside Ethan, breath steady, body quivering with restrained energy. His tactical vest clung to him, the white letters Police K9 flashing whenever lightning cut the sky. His amber eyes locked on the rows of containers, as if he could already smell the fear sealed within. Harper's team hits the west. Ramirez pushes north, Ethan whispered. Shadow and I cut through the middle. Priority is the kids. We don't stop until every lock is broken. Harper met his eyes, voice grim. Once this starts, we're ghosts. Ethan's jaw tightened. Ghosts can still save lives. 3 fingers raised. 2. 1. The night erupted. Gunfire cracked from the west, muzzle flashes slicing the dark. Alarms wailed, shouts rang across the yard as guards scrambled. "Go!" Ethan barked, and Shadow launched forward like a bullet. They weaved between containers as rounds sparked against steel. A guard rounded the corner. Shadow hit him mid-stride, jaws snapping his rifle from his grip. Ethan dropped him with a strike and pressed on. Then came the cries. Thin, muffled, desperate. Ethan's chest clenched. Shadow pawed frantically at a container, claws scraping metal. Ethan pressed his ear. Fists banged faintly inside. He fired into the lock, sparks spitting, and wrenched the door open. 6 children blinked back at him, pale and trembling. The youngest clutched a blanket. The oldest wrapped her arms around the rest. "It's okay," Ethan rasped. "You're safe now." Shadow stepped forward, tail low, posture soft, eyes steady. Tiny hands reached for him, their fear melting at the shepherd's presence. "Stay low," Ethan urged, guiding them behind cover. "We'll be back." He turned to Shadow. "Not done yet, boy." They pressed deeper. More locks shattered, more cries answered. Ethan's hands bled from torn steel. His lungs burned, but Shadow never faltered, dragging gunmen down, shielding children with his body, nudging them into the light. "Harper," Ethan called over the radio. "Got kids, east side." "We're pinned. Get as many as you can," came the static-laced reply. Smoke billowed, rain poured, and still Ethan fired into locks, pulling one terrified face after another into freedom. By the time Harper's team broke through, nearly 20 children clung to blankets and to Shadow's vest, their wide eyes fixed on the shepherd, as if he were the only solid thing in the world. Then the air shifted. From the far end of the lane, a figure emerged through rain and smoke. Broad-shouldered, armored, a steel pipe gripped like a toy. Scars carved across his jaw. Ashton's enforcer, his voice carried low and jagged. "You should have stayed out of this, Cole." Ethan raised his weapon, but instinct said this fight wouldn't end with bullets. He holstered it. "Then let's finish it." The man grinned and charged. The pipe whistled past Ethan's skull, smashing sparks from a container wall. Ethan countered with a punch to the ribs, useless against armor. A return strike hammered Ethan to the mud, breath exploding from his chest. Shadow lunged. His teeth sank into the man's arm, dragging him sideways. But the enforcer swung the pipe down, cracking across Shadow's ribs. The shepherd yelped but stayed upright, blood streaking his fur, eyes blazing. "Stupid mutt," the brute sneered. "No!" Ethan roared, throwing himself back into the fight. Fists slammed into his jaw, blood filled his mouth, but rage kept him standing. Every face he'd freed, every scar he carried, he poured it into each blow. Shadow struck again, ripping the pipe free with his jaws. The enforcer slammed fists into his sides, but the dog would not let go. Ethan drove a shoulder into the man's chest, tackling him into the mud. They rolled, grappling, the enforcer's iron grip crushing Ethan's throat. Darkness edged his vision. Then Shadow was there, teeth tearing the man off him. Ethan gasped air, seized the pipe, and slammed it across the brute's throat, pinning him with desperate strength. Shadow anchored him, jaws clamped deep. The man thrashed, then stilled, breath ragged. Ethan cuffed him, chest heaving. "You think this ends with me?" The enforcer spat. "It ends when every last one of you is gone," Ethan rasped. A broken laugh. "The heart still beats, Cole, and it'll outlast you." Ethan ignored him. He dropped to Shadow's side, pressing trembling hands to his bloodied fur. "You held the line, boy. You saved me. Again." Shadow's tail tapped weakly against the mud, his eyes fierce even through pain. The storm raged, but here in the mud, one monster had fallen. By dawn, rain slowed to a drizzle. The yard was chaos. Sirens, medics, officers cutting open containers, children stumbling out into blankets and arms. Ethan sat against the wheel of a van. Shadow stretched across his lap, bandaged but breathing. The shepherd's eyes stayed half open, refusing to close without Ethan's word. "You stubborn dog," Ethan whispered, stroking damp fur. "Should have gone down 100 times, but you stayed." Shadow's tail twitched faintly. Around them, children clung to stuffed toys, medics whispered reassurance, and parents fell to their knees in disbelief as lost sons and daughters ran into their arms. Ethan's throat burned watching it. Memories of his sister's braids, of a porch long empty, cut sharp. She had never been saved, but these children had. A medic crouched. "He's tough, but he needs treatment. He's a hero." Ethan leaned close to Shadow. "Hear that? They finally see what you've always been." The sun broke through, gold spilling over steel and rust. Ethan stared at it, voice raw. "We can't end all the darkness, but every child we bring back into the light, it's worth it. Every single one." By mid-morning, traffickers were loaded into vans, evidence secured. The Empire was in chains, but Ethan knew the Hydra still lived. He lifted Shadow gently into the cruiser's back seat, laying him on a blanket. The dog's head rested against his arm until he settled. Sliding behind the wheel, Ethan looked once more at Pier 47, the wreckage, the survivors, the storm still echoing in the city's bones. It wasn't enough. It never would be. But it was a start. Shadow shifted, resting his head on the console, eyes half closed but steady. Ethan reached over, hand on his neck. "We're not done, partner. Not by a long shot. But as long as it's you and me, they'll never win." Shadow's tail thumped once, faint but resolute. The cruiser rolled into the dawn, road stretching unknown ahead. And with his battered shepherd breathing beside him, Ethan knew one thing with certainty. The fight would continue, always together. At the heart of this story is a truth many of us already know deep down. Dogs don't just walk beside us, they carry pieces of our hearts. A German shepherd's loyalty isn't measured in words, but in quiet moments. The steady gaze when we're tired, the weight of their head on our lap when we need it most, and the courage they show when protecting the ones they love. Stories like Ethan and Shadow's remind us that love between a person and a dog is more than companionship. It's a bond that heals, protects, and endures through every storm. If you've ever felt that quiet connection with your own dog and want to explore ways to deepen it, I've found a resource that might mean something to you. Take it as a gentle recommendation from a friend who understands how much these animals mean to us. Because at the end of the day, it's not about training or commands. It's about trust, love, and the quiet promise we make to never walk alone.